Welcome back. In this part, we will start and basically and looking briefly um, to the history of the skilled and unskilled labor force. And that's another aspect actually. And I said we should ask why certain jobs are supplied with a lot of workforce, while other jobs are not supplied with that much of workforce. But also interestingly, uh, when we take skilled labor force, the people who have specific skills that are more expensive, more useful and paying those skills that are paying off. At certain periods, actually, the values of the skills in general are maybe decreasing. Um, So when you look to pre-capitalist era, actually, in the cities and towns, there were several skills that were very valuable. Um, those are called craft skills. They were not taught in a university. Some of them in very early, for example, in Sumerian cities, the reading and writing was a skill which was done by professionals. Not everyone could do that because it took 10 years to learn reading and writing. Their writing is very difficult. Um, so you go to school to learn that, but other skills like carpenters, for example, or metal smiths, usually learned from um, uh, a specific institution called apprenticeship. You work for a carpenter, and that carpenter is actually teaching you the skill. But in the end, you should prove that you are skillful enough to meet basic standards of the craft. And there, usually, there is a guild that is testing you and allow you to become the actual master of that craft, who is also able to open a shop. Um, um, if you are not master, you can only work for a master. You cannot do the job yourself. The actual job yourself. There are restrictions on what and how much you can do. Uh, but it's to some extent similar to current cases, actually. Of course, now we don't have apprentices, um, but if you don't get certain, for example, degrees, then you cannot do certain jobs. Um, and guilds, by having the authority to give permission to the people to become master, they also kind of limit the number of carpenters also. Of course, unofficially, not officially. They don't say they are giving permissions in that, taking that into account, but basically their ability to keep the number of carpenters, for example, low. Um, when industrial revolution started, well, let me say not industrial revolution as an initial initial development, rather the first machinery which will make industrial revolution were created. And even before that, actually, when the demand was high and basically uh, workshops which were, for example, producing wood products are now required to produce a lot of product. Well, in that case, uh, the workshops ideally needed hire more workers, but initial production uh, process required skill, and those people who have those skills are not that high in number. On the other hand, that was also the time when in agriculture those machinery started to be used, and there was a high number of, and in agriculture also um, the productivity has increased, and basically the owner of the agricultural land wanted to grow crops like cotton, for example. Now they don't want to feed all these peasants. They want to keep the number of peasants as little as possible. Previously, the peasants were growing food. They were getting what they have grown. So in that sense, I mean, feeding them was not that much expensive, and the owners of land were like community leaders. Now they are actual owners of the land. They had property rights. Previously, they didn't had in current sense the property rights. Rather, they were, as I said, like community leaders, landlords in the area, and now as people who have property rights of land, they rather want to have as small labor force as possible to care for the land and pay them wages and grow the crops that from that they can earn most money. So large number of people who were living in the rural areas, they flow to the cities, but they were potential workforce. The workshops needed, but they could not be used because they didn't have skills. Up to the very point where the machinery allow factories to employ those unskilled workers. Well, at the beginning of industrial revolution, even the children as small as in some cases 4 years old were working in the factories. Of course, that was difficult for the children, difficult for their psychology in many ways. I mean, but another fact is the jobs in the factory could be done by 4 or 5-year-old children. So the skills needed were really very low. I mean, even considering the general skills. So now you had this unskilled labor force working for low wages, for long hours, who you can hire when you need. When you don't need it, you can easily fire them. The rules are not that much set. But as though that workforce started to get experience in factories, at least learn the working conditions, know each other, they start to organize. And when they organize, they start to basically demand for certain rights. Higher wages or lower hours are among those rights, but another type of right they demanded was they wanted children and women out of the labor force. I mean, of course, because at that time, still, even though women were working in the workforce, still the general idea was women's actual place was at home. That's another discussion, women's place in the workforce. But they also wanted children out of the labor force also. What would, and increasingly, I mean, starting from a certain age, like 5-4, the minimum age the children were able to spend at work was raised progressively. And as, for example, the children below the age 12, 11 started to not anymore employed by the workplaces, the question becomes, what would you do with those children? I mean, previously the children were in the villages and helping their families in the farm work. And of course, their families also, there was a drive to produce as much as possible. They might not be pushing the children as hard as the factories were pushing them hard. Of course, there were other bad things, like, for example, diseases that were coming periodically and killing many children. But in terms of working conditions, it was not that harsh as factories. But anyway, now those children are free and they don't have farm work to attend. Their families are employed by the factories, and what will they do? Well, school comes as a solution, and it not only provide a place where the children before working age go, they also teach the children certain general skills for work, but also for get the sense of nationhood. I mean, the social integrity and certain values are also taught in those schools from very early days on, so that the children had those values in their minds also. But also certain skills were taught that were that would increase the productivity level of the workers that provide the children some human capital. As workers continue to organize, of course, they were able to increasingly bargain their working hours, wages, basically. So unskilled workers becomes more costly, and still, for example, 1950s, 60s in the United States, the factory workers of that era are almost that they are middle class. I mean, that work is that labor force is as much valued as the in some cases the uh, labor force with the university degrees. That's very interesting. I mean, some unskilled workforce has increased their status even to very high levels. But this also increase the demand for skilled labor force. I mean, now specific skills, since the unskilled labor force already has a high value, the people with skills, well, their relative value has fallen down. And after 1945, United States, in order to increase its skilled labor force, it has created. It first made the army members, I mean the soldiers who come from the war, it made them give them the opportunity to go to the colleges for free. But then they also created a ring of community colleges at different places in the country, and at each place, for example, people who are in New York City were able to go to the College of New York City for free. If people who are living in another part of the country could go to the New York City Community College, then that was not free. But everyone has at least a community college where he or she can go free. So now the more people have started to get specific skills. So the skilled, you have a higher percentage of skilled labor force in terms of, I mean, the official definition of skilled labor force or conventional definition. And recently, however, I mean, starting with 1970s and 60s, first, the workforce that is coming from other countries. Secondly, as women and minorities get more to the workforce increasing, and they were not able to get to the union, so they were not organized. And the organized labor force also, in many ways, could not integrate them. And also, U.S. factories that fly to outside other countries and open factories there. All of them make it possible for the country to get access to a cheap unskilled labor force. Meanwhile, states also start to, I mean, many cities go bankrupt, and basically they stopped financing even their own citizens' college costs. So, significant number of people had already college degrees, and their children continue to have. Even though those children usually get into financial debt, they borrow money from the bank, and it takes sometimes 10, 20, 30 years to pay that debt. But skilled labor force, the percentage of it doesn't fall down, but it somehow it didn't start to it doesn't continue to rise as fast as it was rising before, and increasingly. Well, people from different universities, people with different skills, begin to do different jobs at different sectors. So, in a way, the idea there is the labor market become more flexible. So, I will say a last word on this, and then I will pass to the math part of it. today.